Hello, hello all. Welcome to our Sinners webinar, and I believe this is the first one that we are having. I am Dr. Stephane Dunn with Morehouse College Cinema, Television, and Emerging Media Studies. So I'm a professor of film and a film critic and a filmmaker, and I am just thrilled to be kicking this off with one of my favorite artistes, film artiste, Ms. Hannah Beachler. I want to tell you about her. At the end, we will also entertain some questions for students, so you can put those in the chat. Please, thank you very much. But let me introduce our special guest. Hannah Beachler, production designer, is a prolific artist with an affinity for evocative designs and visuals. She currently is at work as a production designer on Children of Blood and Gone, directed by Gina Prince Bythewood. She designed the Broadway musical The Wiz, Todd Haynes' docu-narrative feature film Dark Waters, and the pilot for Why the Last Man. Beachler collaborated with one Beyonce, no last name needed, on the visuals for on the Run tour too, and on that visual album, The Gift, for Disney's live action film The Lion King. She made history as the first African American to be nominated and win an Academy Award for her work as production designer on a film I'm sure will be familiar to you, Marvel Studios' Black Panther. And her longtime collaborator, Ryan Coogler, that was one of his works, as you know. Beachler also collaborated with Coogler on Black Panther Wakanda Forever and Creed and his debut film, which brought him to us, Fruitvale Station, also starring Michael B. Jordan. The film won the 2013 Sundance Film Festival's Grand Jury Prize and the Audience Award. Beachler also collaborated on another film that I think will be very familiar to you with Barry Jenkins on Moonlight. I would want to also note that she also provided those stunning visuals on the Lemonade album of on Lemonade by Beyonce, earning an Art Directors Guild Award for Excellence in Production Design and an Emmy nomination for Outstanding Production Design. Her current collaborators include director Steven Soderbergh, Academy Award nominated directors Todd Haynes and Dee Reese, and others, Khalil Joseph, just mentioned Beyonce, and so on. And her bio is really getting too long for me. Uh, it's getting too long, Hannah Beachler, but welcome and thank you for having this
Thank you.
conversation in honor of the upcoming Ryan Coogler directed film, Sinners.
Yeah.
Right. So we're going to jump right into it. So I mentioned before, I always refer to you as what you are, number one, which is a storyteller. And you really bring the visual story to life on screen. Now, Sinners is to me, I've seen the film. It is a dazzling reminder of how essential production design is to how we, the audience, experience a movie. But can you give us a little bit more insight into the scope of your work as a production designer? And I say this because there was a time when I myself, as a young person, as a student, did not know exactly what a production designer. I think it was not until really college that I understood that and took my first film class. So,
Yes. So, there's a lot of ways to look at production design, and I think the easiest way to sort of, in layman's term, is like if you were to look at any one frame in a movie and you removed the actors out of the frame, what you see, what is left, is production design. So I collaborate with almost every department on a film and, very closely with the director. And we start talking about the mood and the tone. And depending on the director, like with Ryan, we sort of have a shorthand and he kind of tells me the story of the people within the story. And then I start designing, and we usually start much earlier than the film begins. He'll, be like, okay, I'm going to do this, that, and the other. And I need you to like, start putting some ideas together and let's talk. And so it's very collaborative in the sense of like, the characterization of the place that we are putting the story, because the place is as important to Ryan as the story itself. So for me, it's a little, it's juicy because I get to dive in and really go deep. And, it's not just about, creating something on the film, but it's also about people and how do you move people and how do I honor people and how do I honor the story and the people in the story and bring in things from my community, from my culture, and throughout the diaspora. So we can always be reminded of who we are and where we came from. So, in a sense, how do you design an emotion?
Wow, I love that. And I think what you said probably gets at what is sort of a fundamental or guiding aesthetic for you, no matter what the project is. That would that be fair to say?
That's very fair.
Oh,
Yes,
wow.
absolutely.
I love that. So in Sinners, I mean, you guys, when you see it, you'll know what I mean. It's such a rich tapestry of myth, history, the present, and the future. I mean, historical memory in that film is fraught with notes of pleasure and trauma. I was a little traumatized in a delicious kind of way, you all, which is something you've visualized before in your work with Ryan Coogler, even with Beyonce's Lemonade. Now, in Centers, we have strong cultural markers. I mean, South, the church, the juke joint, the train, cotton fields, landscapes that really define characters and so on. So, can you share maybe a little insight, give us a little sneak peek into the sensibility that shaped your artistic choices and vision with Centers specifically?
Well, I'm based out of New Orleans, so Mississippi right next door. And I've been there for quite some time now. And the first thing, after we started talking about this is a movie, I went to Clarksdale, Mississippi. And, I kind of just took a journey. I went with one of the art directors and I wanted to talk to all the people. I wanted to see all the places and the texture and understand the history and just walk around and just talk to people on the street, take photos of interesting things, whether it was a blade of grass or an awning, and just understand the texture and the history of the place. So a lot of research went into the history and it's the fun part because some of it's even very surprising for me. Things that I noticed when I was there that I wanted to include in the movie. So that was one sense of it. And then I wanted to take sort of, what is myth about the South and turn it in sort of to an American Gothic look and feel. So for me, the first thing that I wanted to do, and Ryan talked about like big vistas. I think at this point everybody knows it's 70 millimeter IMAX. So we're on a big format and we're on film, which is, you don't often get to see anymore. And so we knew we wanted these, Mississippi big sky, right? And I wanted to really create silhouettes. I wanted to create these very strong geometrical shapes with on the horizon within that world. So a little bit of, if you think of like Dennis Gassner, who is Tim Burton's production designer, you get exaggerated shapes, leaning things, think of Big Fish a little bit. But then I also, the thing that one of the movies I always go back to is Wynn Thomas and Spike Lee's Crooklyn for the fabulous color in places you don't think you're going to see color. And oftentimes when you're looking at a period piece, especially when it's set in the 30s and, during the Depression or pre-Depression, it's sort of this like desaturated black and white and kind of gray. And it's like, sepia. And I was like, no, Black people are some of the most colorful people I know. And one of the things that I talked to a lot of the people about in Mississippi, they were like, talking to this older woman, she had to be like 80 and she was sitting up on a bench outside an old church, nobody around. I walked up and I said, well, what's going on here? Just started a conversation with her. And she said, well, you could always tell the Africans. And I said, well, why could you always tell the Africans? She said, because they have the most color on.
Oh, I love that.
Had all the color on. And so I was like, that's not something you see all the time. And I wanted to add color. And as I started doing that, then you start playing with the color story of this is an American story. And the colors to me came in red, white, and blue. And there's so much behind those colors. Like white is the sense of spirit, oh, well, excuse me, white in this film is the sense of holiness and sort of that purity of the church. And then blue, because I use a specific Gulakichi Haint blue, which is a little more green, a little more teal, which is on the coast in the South Carolina. and which is a group of people that were slaves and they own their own land now. And there's a big conflict going on there. It's a long story. I won't get into it, but I loved that Haint Blue. And we have
Oh,
Haint Blue in New Orleans, but it's a nice pale Haint, right? And they had that really punchy. So for one of the characters who is our spiritual character, we have blue, we have Haint Blue.
mhm.
And then you have the juke joint, which is
Yeah.
red, right? Red is fire and
Sexy, all
hedonism
of
and
that.
sexy, and it's life because it's blood and it's capitalism.
Mm,
Capitalism.
commodification.
And we are in Mississippi, one of the richest lands in the country at one time because of the amount of cotton that went out, with some of the most poorest people in the
Yes.
world.
Yeah, per
The
capita.
dichotomy between capitalism and purity and spirituality and how the reconciliation played out on the land, because that's where the crime took place.
Mhm.
We start out talking about land in this film. So that's the only thing I'm going to give away, y'all.
Yeah.
So
I'm dancing around it too, right? I think we're doing a
yeah,
pretty good
yeah,
job. And like we're
yeah, we're doing a
giving.
great job. But and so that's where like the sensibility came from because I started to think about like what were those hardships, but what was, what was the also joy, you know? And then a lot of just the research also lent myself to when I was up in Clarksdale. I'm walking around and I'm seeing all these signs for tamales, right? I'm like, tamales in the South? Because there's nothing like that in New Orleans. And so I started asking around about it. There was a certain point in time in the early 20s, around the time of the movie, where the United States government was trucking in anybody and everybody to pick cotton, including Mexican nationals that didn't
Absolutely.
speak any English. So they were in the cotton field on the plantations right next to the black people. And the black people were like, at lunchtime, they would go and they'd have their lunch pails and they would go and sit down. But Mexican people, because you had to pick 500 pounds a day, right, kept working because they were eating tamales. So the black people were like, "Oh wait, this is you can write like here's something that's sustainable because
That's
they're using
mobile. Right. Yeah.
water, and you can make this and you can have a whole meal in it." So now tamales since the 1920s have been king in the Delta.
Wow.
Two cultures that come together. So you see that
You
within
do.
this.
You absolutely. The film
Absolutely.
is, I thought that was so fascinating, the mix of cultures that are reflected and the way that you visually represent their distinctive cultural sort of identification within the
Yes,
tapestry of the American Black Southern tapestry.
exactly.
Absolutely fascinating. I got it, girl. I got it. I was watching. I was
Yeah,
just so
good.
struck and captivated by all that I was seeing. Sometimes setting really can in a film be really background-ish, right? But in Sinners, you really do appreciate that this really is a visual medium, that the visual story is really telling the story. And so you're paying attention to every delicious detail, the way that this tree is framed, where you decide. It's really just amazing. I wanted to ask you in a sort of an extension of that. So for some of those locations, because I wondered when you happened upon, the farmhouse or you happened upon this place where the juke joint, what can you share just the story of even one of those critical locations in the film? Because I felt the research. I felt that there was spirit involved in this choice or that choice.
I'll share one, and my favorite one, and it's the Hank Blue house.
Okay.
And when we went, and Ryan was telling me, he's like, Hannah, he's like, I see these trees around this house. And I said, oh, I know exactly where it is. Like it just went through my whole body. Like I knew because I live in New Orleans and my career started in New Orleans in film and I had shot pretty much everywhere in New Orleans. But when he said that to me, there was something, it was almost, and this might sound silly and crazy, but it's true. Something came like a voice, like something said, go here. And I was like, I know exactly where. And I went down with the team and I was like, it's here. It's like this spot, I know it. I feel it so intensely. And I said to the location manager, she's like, yeah, okay. He's like, another film has this location. We can't use it.
Wow.
I said, no, no, we can use this.
You know, you
No,
were
no,
saying we
that
have
won't
to
work.
use it. We have to
That won't
use
work
it.
for me.
Yeah.
That won't work for me or us or any of it. This is it. Like this, the ancestors were like, it is here. And I said, it is here. And I, for a month, was on it like a dog with a bone. I was like, we are not. And then finally, at the very last second, they were like, we got it. So
Ah,
then we started building there, and I took Ryan there, and I'm like, I'm telling you, this is it. I've so we started building that on the location, the Haint Blue house. And I won't want to say much more about that than that. But when we built it, as it went up, I don't even know what to say.
I mean, I
Ryan
felt it.
walked
That's why I
in there with
asked.
me.
I
Ryan
felt
walked in
it.
there with me, and something blew like some wind. The ancestors came through the back door out the front
Mhm.
and blew us both. And when people with it's and it was just like, and so the next day everybody came to film, it's starting on set, and you're kind of busy. And we walked in and walking Ryan and Adam through it again. And we noticed all of these, and I don't know if everybody knows what theirs are. They're called weevils. It's a certain type of spider, and they make these certain patterns. Were over all of these very specific books that I put around that had to do with our culture in New Orleans of Voodoo and that type of Santeria spirituality that the character in that has to do with her. And it was everywhere. It was like just overnight they came up, and it was like the ancestors were saying to us, we are here with you. And I walk out the door, and there's like this, the language, the dialect coach was there, and she was crying, and then the actors came on. And so one of the things that I did was I hung prayers up in the rafters of this building, just little prayers. And Michael is in the middle of a scene, and one of the prayers fell on him, and he picked it up, and it says, you are where you're supposed to be.
Oh, wow. Are you serious?
They
You
were there with us, and this location was a plantation.
Yes, that is what I wanted to get to. I was going to say to you that I was sure it was. I was sure it was without having researched that aspect that I said, I know Hannah. I know. I know she chose this place had to be a plantation for
It was.
real in its
It was.
history. And
It
you
was.
felt, I felt that the characters, I felt them feeling that ghostly
Yes.
kind of
Yes.
presence. Right.
And the trees felt that,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
everything about that. And so every location for me and for Ryan, because we pretty much know, right? And it's just visceral. You will feel that, like, I can't even say, like, my whole body is like a beacon, it lights up. I know this is it. If it's not it, I'm like, let's bounce. But if it is it, it's like it goes off. And I'll say to Ryan, like, this spot, and he's like, this spot, y'all.
See, and that
And
I love that. I love that. It really gets to the next thing I wanted to talk to you about, which is this sort of relationship that you have with Ryan Coogler. In class, we talk a lot about the concept of the auteur, the director as author. And generally students, they really have tended to lean towards and sort of emphasize, but that film, like other critics, that it's a collaborative process, filmmaking. And you and Ryan Coogler have now made, what is this, the fifth film, four or five?
yes,
It's the fifth film, including this latest. So it seems like your working relationship at this point is pretty organic. Would you say you sort of have kind of this shorthand by this point? I mean, there's this implicit trust in each of your sort of storyteller aesthetic. But take us into that a little bit, a little bit more because you've hinted at it already, not intending to.
yeah. I think that certainly you will find the people who you creatively and aesthetically face the same direction with, right? And at the same time that we also use our different perspective to our advantage in that relationship. And it kind of works like, you know, now what it is like, Ryan and I'll start talking, and what I need him to tell me about is the people. I need him to tell me the story. I need him to tell me like who they are and what they do and what they want and what they wish and what they're struggling with, what their pains are. I need to hear it all,
Is
And
this
he said
is this
to me,
before the script? Is this before the script even? Or
yes, it's before
okay.
the script.
Sure.
And he said to me about everyone in this film, what would they be if they were allowed to be anything they wanted to, like today? What would they be? And then I thought about that. And then we got back together and we were talking about, and he's like, look, he's like, one little thing. I'd be like, Grace is an artist. And I
Mhm.
won't say who she is in the film because you're going to have to see it to find out. But
He's worth
she
watching.
take a look at the signs of her stores. Because if she was an artist, what would she be doing? Right? If she was allowed to be completely free at that time, which you're not as a woman, like what does that look like? So there's that contemporary in there, right? And it's all about like, well, what would they be doing? What would they be thinking? Like they're still contemporary then, but if they could be us now, what would they be? And then take that back and let's see that come from them a little bit here and there. And everybody. So he literally just tells me the story of the place, the people, like what all of that, like what they lost, what they've struggle, like all of it. And then from there is where I start. And the other thing Ryan does that I love so much is that like he will give characters colors. And sometimes we like when I told him about the red, white, and blue, he ran with that. But there was one other person who was like, there was another color in there. There was black in there.
Uh-huh.
And that was so much fun to play with and how I included that in there. And so then knowing that, who's a hardliner, who is this, whose colors are this, knowing that for me, then I can really sink in. And then I get with Miss Ruth Carter. And then, we get with Autumn,
Yes.
we all pull that together, both from our own perspectives, but also together with Ryan's story. So it's kind of works like that. And Ryan and I just like, and he's like my little brother, right? It's like, and he also is always like, he doesn't really have to worry about like what I'm doing, He's like, I know you're gonna get me what I need, and it's gonna be where it needs to be, and it's gonna be what it needs to be. And he don't have to worry about like his vision. It's gonna
Safe with you. It's going to be
hey,
realized
gonna be
with
realized.
you because you have that. And so I think that's such an evolution because I imagine that from the first film, which I think was Fruitvale, basically, right? It was the first film to now, like you get there by I guess 4 or 5. It took y'all about second film. Y'all were like, we know what we're doing.
Oh yeah.
It's,
I would say by Creed, we had that, you know,
yeah.
natural sort of second hand. And he knows he's like, he ain't gonna tromp through I need water for this set. I need water for this location. Okay, he ain't gonna tromp through the swamp with alligators and water moccasins. And guess what? We found the location.
Oh
Because
wow. You
I
didn't
was like,
go in
Ryan
there with
gonna get
those
his
gates.
water.
Did you really
Ryan
go
gonna
in
get
there?
his water. Oh,
Oh
yes, I
wow.
did.
Oh wow.
I got videos of all the alligators, and I made fun of a
Oh.
couple of them. But it was like, Ryan's gonna get what he needs to tell this story because I also know him as an auteur and that his voice is extremely important. And if he can't tell the story the way he needs it, I can't design what I need to design. So
Hmm.
that's I go hard.
And I know this, and I love how you just called him an auteur. So let me ask you something by extension. Are directors just auteur, or is Hannah Beachler an auteur? I would say she is, but I can interpret that if I want to, because I've
Yeah.
seen so much of your work, and I understand how much goes into your art and how you tell stories um, through your visual artistry and talent. So you would say that, or no, or how you
Ryan is definitely an auteur, and I saw that in Fruitvale Station because I mean, I just knew right
name?
away, knew right away. And like I said, his voices and his style, his voice and his style is such an important part of American filmmaking. Um, am I an auteur? I don't know. I'm an artist.
Yeah, Yeah,
I'm
you're
an
in a
artist
tour.
that
Our
serves,
tour artist. It's
I'm
settled.
an artist and that's settled. I'm an artist that wants to work with people who have the same need to tell a story for people and about people, so everyone can feel the same emotions that I do and that the director does. It's so very important to me, and to do it in a way that is not something that's on the nose or that we know of. I like to genre bend. So, and Ryan definitely is a genre bender. And, and I love that about how he can entertain you while giving you so much more than you thought you were going to get. And you can hear it or you don't have to hear it. You can be entertained. You can hear all of the things that he's saying about the world and the people and what that past was. Um, but that to me is such a fascinating thing that he does so seamlessly and so beautifully. And I always just say that like I'm just one of the brushstrokes on his canvas.
Wow.
And I think that it's important to me, to be recognized as an artist and not just a creative or a production designer, because I do other things as well, you know? But I just want to make sure I'm telling the story that the director is envisioning.
Mhm. Why?
I
Well,
don't know if that makes, maybe that does make me
no,
immature.
it
I
makes
need help
all
on
kinds of sense. And there are two things that I love that you said, because I wrote in my note, I literally wrote down that this is a delicious genre bending film centers. And I said that it's got the racial horror, it's got the supernatural fantasy, the realistic, the historical drama, the myth, the symbolism, all of that mix. And
that.
of course that's in, Black Panther, that's in, but this is still a really, really unique
Yes,
project. And I wondered if you could say more about sort of, in some ways, giving sort of the visual life to the supernatural. Of course, you've mentioned low color and location, but take us more into the, and then your background in New Orleans. So I guess this all comes together and how you sort of felt this film, I think, in a
yes.
really unique way. Would that be fair to say?
I when my beginning of my career, when I decided like I'm a production designer now, I'm going to be a production designer. The first like maybe four films I did were like horror movies, and I always wanted to do one because I wanted to understand what they were and how that was done. And I've always loved John Carpenter and Wes Craven, of course, and Ryan credits some of that influence into this film. And so I really was like ready for this.
Mm.
And I'm just like, I'm going to take those things I did early on, take from that a little bit what I learned about that, and now like really like be intentional. And there's a lot of intention. So I will say one other thing about another location, and this
Please.
will kind of round out the intention of that and creating tension, creating sort of that controlled psychology, like the controlling the psychology of the space as well as maybe the audience, and while keeping the vernacular true to the Delta, to the time period, to the way that they built.
True.
Um, so one of the things, I talk a little bit about the farmhouse. I won't say more than the farmhouse.
Whew,
Um,
that's enough.
and inside, I'll say that you will notice that this the whole place is wainscot. So there's lines. There's lines everywhere that push you around, and over their heads, you'll see these lines on the ceiling that go back and lines on the side. And a little bit of when we started doing it, it was like, okay, I want them to be 1 inch lines that go all the way down, ceiling in the first part of the hallway. But when we turn the bend, the lines go down to half. So the hallway starts to look tilted because your
Mm.
whole all the way the lines work psychologically that it
That
bends
distort, yeah, this
exactly.
sort
So
of
you're kind of
orientation. Yeah.
You're right. You're a little disoriented. I wanted to throw that off a little bit. And I don't know how much of it's in the film, but you kind of like see around it, and then there's lines in the other room. So for me, there's a lot of lines, and I can't say too much. Like again, I don't want to say too much, but there's a reason for that. There's also so a lot of it is geometry. I will say about the quickly about the church. And I'm not telling plot or anything, but about the church.
Please,
Uh,
please.
that we built that on location. Almost everything is built on location. And we built that on location. And in that time period and before when in especially in Louisiana and pretty much all over the South, slaves were building their own cabins, their own, accommodate, whatever you want to call it, right? They were doing all the building. They built all of that. And they were using what's called dimensional cuts. They're true cuts. They're the most perfect cut that someone could make. They don't do it anymore.
No.
Only the people that came from Africa make these cuts, and they don't know how they did it. And given that they did not have the technology to do it. So, and just very quickly, just a little logistics on that. So, like a 2x4 is not actually 2 inches and 4 inches, not anymore. Used to be. That looks different. So, everything is dimensionally cut in the film. So, every building feels a little heavier, but we put more wood in the church, so that feels heavy coming from the ceiling. Um,
Spirit
Also,
that's in there. Mhm.
there's a little Wakanda Forever Easter egg in there too, and I won't say. But all of the framework in there, so you have the pastor, and you have the crosses, and the cross sits in the middle of the framework. The framework is exactly 33 inches wide. He stands at 16.5, three crosses. 33 is the age that Jesus died.
Ah.
And then you see the Son, the Father, and the Holy Spirit. So when you see that, think about that when you see the three crosses in the 33.
So this is why I was so excited to be speaking to you because see, I've had deep conversation with you before and now how you broke down the thing. And so I'm so glad that our students have and are really being taken to class. And I think that it is really going to just increase and deepen the appreciation when they are seeing the film. Because I was paying attention to even the way light would come through the slats of the slits in a certain kind of way and then land. I didn't have the language for all that you were doing, but I could see, I said, this Hannah is a beast up in here. She's doing things. I was like, I couldn't put it all together. I'm not good with equations, but what I knew watching it that just floored me was that there is all kinds of math and geometry going in here. This myth meeting, right? And you're also talking about myth across generations. So there
Yes.
is myth that reaches back to Africa and stops, here in the Atlantic slave trade that goes to, Jim Crow, post-slavery to Reconstruction, all the way up to the 21st century type of mythic
Yes.
ties.
Yes.
Which brings me to wanting to hear you talk about how this film so historically, I think, grounded. It's sort of like I likened it to sort of August Wilson's cycle of 10 plays, right? That
Yes.
sort of is a tapestry of the African American experience. This
Yes.
is what I
Yes.
thought of Sinners. This is what I'm thinking of
Yes.
Sinners. And
Yes.
so what for you do you think is really important or really timely, I should say, even though it's set in the 1930s, even though, it has this sort of, particular period piece kind of like thing, right? But this film about Black music, about land and ownership and the theft of land. Talk to us a little bit about how you think of Sinners in terms of, I think, sort of contributing a note on our historical and sort of contemporary like moment. No, that's a big question, but I just want to hear your thoughts. You've hinted at it already. So,
I know. I'm like, ooh, that is a big question. Let me think about that. I mean, I think that because, you know, I mean, there's things in it like, a wooden nickel
Mm,
and plantation money
yeah.
make you mad, you know? And so we're talking about these things, and there's honestly things that, people think are myth, and it's not. And there's always something truth in myth. And I think that again, that's why I call it sort of the Southern American Gothic, the Black Southern American Gothic film of myth and spirituality. Um, our ancestors are still with us. There's that, um, where we come from and where we're going, and this idea of mortality,
Ah,
mortality of our community, mortality of us as individuals, of our traditions. I think that that's one thing that we face, and that's one thing that, is part of this story, and how our traditions die, um, and how we fight to keep them alive. And then just sort of, again, like you said, we touch on a little bit of everything in history going forward, is even coming back from war and
oh
how
yeah,
our,
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I
right?
was struck by it, by the music, the soundtrack, and the way the soundtrack meets every sort of frame and the background. I mean, it's just really a poem that centers. I mean, there's such a lyricism in the visual sort of tapestry of it all with the music, which we see cross generationally.
That's right, with the blues, right? And that's where it started with the train and leaving and the Great Migration, and the connection of Chicago and Mississippi, Emmett Till. Um, were there's all of that. The cars, just
Oh,
black
the
every
train,
car.
the train. I just was struck by all of it, the way the train station looked, the way, I mean, it was just, I was sort of like, just being hit like a sensory overload almost in just the right way, which is befitting a horror sort of, film, really,
Exactly.
right? That has that
And
emotional.
sort of where are you safe? Because if you think of Carpenter and you think of Halloween, and the first time that I watched that whole thing takes place in a subdivision, the safest place in America.
Yeah,
Took every person's safety away. It's your zip code,
yeah.
right? How safe is your zip code, and where you live, and who has the right here and there, and to do this, and to travel, and to move about. And when do you take that? And when does it enough? And when does it stop? And so it's all these little things strung together. But my favorite part about all of it is there is a moment of joy and respite
Yes, there is. And community and
and
sort of
community.
communal, yes.
And of all, that is what you take away, because through it all, Black people are going to make music. And we're going to sing and we're going to dance and we're going to eat food and enjoy that.
And love up on something and love up on each other.
And that's right.
And that's in
And I
Sinners. That's
think
all there.
that's all in that moment, right? It's all in that moment. And, again, I don't want to I can't say, I hope nobody's watching. Like, I hope there's nobody in proximity, like, shut up. But, some of the things that Michael says in the end sort of is the big wrap up for all of what we were just talking about. And it kind of comes full circle about, community. And so, yeah, I think it encompasses so much of everything across time, um, that it becomes its own moment.
Hmm. Yeah.
I
As
can't
I
say more.
said,
I don't know how much more I can
you
say. I'm
you
always
you can't
nervous. I'm always
can't.
scared.
As I said, it was like I was thinking of I thought it was just in a conversation with everybody from August Wilson's, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom to, to Jordan Peele. I just thought it was just in conversation, but within Ryan Coogler's unique, distinctive, he's adding that, his unique voice to it. And to, of course, the horror genre, in general, which I'm a big fan of that, playing on that cycle from Hitchcock, notes of Hitchcock to
Yeah.
Carpenter, as you said, to it's all in Sinners, and I just was just absolutely, but in a sort of black vernacular sort of orientation perspective, and all of that.
Absolutely. Because it
Well,
does go to speculative, like black speculative art, right?
there you go.
It goes into these in and out of these places. And I mean, that's Ryan, and that's what makes him an
Mhm.
auteur and so unique.
Yeah.
Um, so unique and you know, no fear, no fear. And that's what, and because of that, being brave. I always say that like we're gonna be brave and do this because that's what we're supposed to do, not because that's what everyone wants to see and that's what critics want to see. We're not doing that. We're
Yeah.
doing what we're supposed to be doing. And Ryan with the biggest smile on his face saying,
Yeah.
"Yep, that's what we're gonna
Yeah.
do." And
And I
I'm like,
think
"I'm
that's
right behind you."
so beautiful because to me, I'm not giving any away in saying this, that by the end of the movie, I felt the aesthetic of the Afrofuturism, of the Afrofuturistic aspect of it, which I think of as very sort of hopeful as well as sort of anticipatory and all of these things. So it has that as well. And so I think, yeah, I totally agree with that. That's there as well, right?
Yes, yes. So
Pat.
it's a ride and it's a good one. And and the other thing about Ryan too is that he's never just like writing a script and this is a good subject. I mean, he was in Mississippi before I was, and
Mhm.
um, going to the recording studios, going to the juke joints, and listening to artists and talking to artists, and learning about the history of the juke joint and going on the blues trails and I got to go to the crossroads, right? I'm standing on the crossroads. And it was the funniest things. I'm like, I can't find these crossroads. And there's a dude in the truck. And I was like, hey, yo, this older guy. I was like, I'm looking for the crossroads. And he just signaled, follow me. And we're just driving down this dirt road in Mississippi. And I'm just like, I don't even know. And he was like, here they are. And, it's those experiences and talking to people and understanding. Also, I think a little bit of it is understanding the lie, understanding like what we are is beautiful, and the lie that was told was that we aren't. The switch up, I'm learning about Papa Lagba, right? Who these blues players that are so genius, and they said, well, they sold their soul to the devil. Well,
Wow.
no.
Ah.
Papa Lakba came to the crossroads and released their inhibition and gave them the potential to be great. There was
Mhm.
no Satan or devil about that. So
Mhm.
all this time, I grew up thinking like, oh, well, these people sold their souls to be good.
Ah.
And that's not at all true.
Right.
They
Yeah.
were just given the ability to be good.
Yeah.
But that history is switched for whose benefit? So
Right. Mhm.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so, there was learning that. And then you take that piece that came to me when I was in Mississippi. I learned of that. And now my inhibitions are free to tell a story. I don't have to think. I understand that, you know, and I think many people do, that what we've learned about our past in this country, well, I'm in South Africa right now, but in America on stateside, isn't exactly always what is it said to be. But to understand um, sort of who the people were then, really who they were, not what someone wrote. And that's when you can free yourself up to tell that story the right way, to tell that story with truth in your heart. And that's what's important too, to always try to be the most truthful, which sometimes you got to look inward at your own self
Hmm.
and talk to your own self about some of your own problems and your own biases and to get through that. Because at the end of the day, art is life, right? Art is how we live. Art isn't something that we just look at that's pretty, but how we move through the world because everything is design. it tells us when we're going to get to the bus. It tells us what the bus looks like and how many people can be on it and what time that bus is going to get there because the lights are like our whole world is sort of moved by that. And so recognizing something like that, how do you kind of condense that and bring it to what you're doing? And it can get, deep, and I can always go there. So
Because
I'm just
sinners
gonna
is
like,
well,
calm
well,
down, Hannah.
Hannah, sinners. No, this is how you do what you do. Artists are deep, and I'm just glad that our students today and myself as well are getting this way more intimate sort of understanding of how indeed deep it really is when we talk about the language of what we are seeing in a film and how this story, comes to us through what you do. It's incredible. So we do have a couple of questions, and I think people are really, just I think they're going to have a lot of thoughts, and I just love imagining students sitting there in the film going, aha, just looking at those slats and this. I love this idea that they're going to be doing that and going, wow, like right when they see this farm. I love that. But we have a question, and this question is from a student, and it says, how do you approach translating the director's vision from script to screen, ensuring that all sets, because this is a lot, Anna, locations, props fully reflect the themes, tone, and character arcs that are laid out in the screenplay. And as you said in your conversations with Ryan, I think this takes us a little bit into you and your team. What's the team look like, Hannah, that is how you probably do what this question is answering, is asking?
Absolutely. We have a great team. And sometimes per movie it's different depending on how big the movie is and how many people I have. But oftentimes I'll have a lead art director and then like three or four art directors. I have set designers. I think I had three set designers, an assistant art director. Then you have your props department, you have your set decorating department, you have your construction and paints department, and they consist of several different departments within that. But I'm also sort of over special effects, and then I work with VFX as well very closely. And of course, I'm over locations, so I have to choose all the locations, and then I bring Ryan to him and then talk him through how those locations will work. And then I work very closely with Autumn, of course. So yeah, like and I can say pretty easily on Panther, like my department was probably 600 people strong, and on this one it was probably maybe 150, 175 in the in my department. So there's a lot to do and a lot to know and a lot to remember. Because, for me, I'm the type of designer that I want to know every board, every color, every
Every
nail.
prop.
It has to be right. We didn't just use, um, planed wood. We used rough sawn wood because it seeps and I needed it to do that. We didn't just use one process to paint the juke joint. We used four processes. We also used acid. We stripped all the wood with acid. Everything is dimensionally cut, which means it has to be cut separately. It can't be cut in a group. The rough sawn wood shrinks, which gives you the slats. And we had to tear down other buildings to use the wood that was from the time period. So I had to seek that out. Um, you do a lot of, I needed to know where camera was. We're on a different format. So, for instance, in the church, I needed to know from the door threshold um, on IMAX how far into the church do I stop seeing the
More math,
um,
ratios, and
yes, how seeing the vaulted ceiling, when do the vault fall out? When do I want that to then only frame a certain part of the back wall? So then I have to raise or lower my vaulted ceiling or move it back this way. So I have people in LA test that size so I can then know how to build the inside of that. I have to know every paint process that goes into every single stick of wood in the entire building. And it all has to be different because each place wants to feel different. I pick and choose every color, every shade of that color. Everything was painted, all of the signage, all of the fonts, all of the artwork, every single can of food and label that went into what you'll see as the grocery store. I approved the graphics for them, and some of the graphics I also do myself. There isn't anything that I didn't have my hands in down to the dirt on the ground outside the juke joint and what color that was and what that was going to look like. All of the rusting on the juke joint. If you look at one portion of the scene, it looks exactly like something like Michael's shirt. And that was something I worked with Ruth on. So it's a continuation of the juke down into his shirt. And you'll see that at one point, how the electricity worked, and that it was tube and knob electricity that ran through, and that we ran it in the right way, and that we fixed it in the right way, that every nail was iron and it didn't wasn't capped. It was the original nail. We used like that's how deep. I
So
could go on and on and on and on and on.
when I said auteur, I was correct, and you have deserved every award that you have gotten, my dear. And by the way, just note Ruth is the Ruth Carter, also the
Yeah.
Academy Award winning Ruth
Time.
Carter, costume designer, master, mistress of costume design, and frequent collaborator of you and Ryan Coogler and too. So I just wanted to make that note because not everybody get to hang out with the Ruth Carter, and say,
I'm saying, I've been lucky.
yes, indeed. On to another question. So this one, how do you approach embedding social commentary into your designs without it feeling forced? Like this, I like this forced part. What's the most subtle detail in one of your past projects that you included that most people missed? And if you want to, Hannah, and without giving any, I don't think it'll give anything away. Certainly, you could give us a little hint in terms of center, just a little hint that won't give anything away about that. But I think that question has something in it in terms of so that it feels organic. It doesn't feel like, okay, hey, we're hitting you on the head with it. This is this.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's because when I approach a set, I'm not trying to do anything else than tell the story about the person that's there for. And now if there's social commentary in that, then there is. I don't I try to do right by it. I don't try to tell I don't I'm not trying to be political or make a statement in any kind of way, but it's like the things like the Gulag Geechee ain't blue, you know. For me, that was a lot about being in the South. It was a lot about what that group of people are currently going through, and how do I make that known in a way that for me, right, that I feel that is right for the set is to paint that color.
Mm,
And while people may not even know what it is, somebody is, and
mm,
somebody's going to talk about it, and people notice. So it's like that. Like I don't have to say like, oh, the Gulag, they're losing their land and all of this. It just simply, and all I thought about it when I was painting was, how would that character put it on her house?
mm.
How would
Yeah.
because she's supposed to be from New Orleans and, ain't blue. It was just the subtlety of me pushing further to the coast because of that
Mhm.
and bringing that in. So that was how I brought in what is happening with people losing their land on the South Carolina coast.
Yeah. And things like how women denied really the space to practice their art, do practice their art, a little bit of in search of our mother's gardens, whether it's how they paint a sign because they really are artists, right? Or handle food or fabric because they are artists in their way. And so on a daily practice, you're thinking about how, like, right, as artists, as women, right, they're doing that.
That's right.
Yeah.
And whether it like if your character is strong and it's like, okay, well, she's the one that people come to get for healing, for food, for to be preyed on. Like so I'm gonna make her that person, but she's also very strong. Like we all know these people, they're in our lives, so I simply have to think about that. I know on this current film I'm working on, uh, I walked into one of the sets and I was talking to the decorator and I said to her and I said, "Well, now who is this set for?" And she's like, "Well, I know this is just like," and I said, "You know what this reminds me of? This reminds me of my neighbor Susan." Because Susan was the woman, she was only 16 and we were all little kids. but we would always go to Susan, like would protect us from the brothers who were always chasing us about. She was always there to play with us and talk to us and read to us. Like she was like suck up mom to everyone in the neighborhood. And she was
Mhm.
like a young woman, right? And we looked up to her in that way. I'm like, this is Susan's place.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
love
that's
that.
how I
I love
kind of
that.
tell myself
Mhm.
stories like what's going on here. Well, in this one spot, this is where the children are learning about their own history. Or, this woman is telling the story in an oral but way, in an oral history. But what if we painted that story on the all around her in symbols?
Absolutely.
Just
We're almost
retelling.
out of time, and I
Oh,
hate that because I want to take this last question then because it
I
sort of
talk too
overlaps with the
much.
other one. So can we say no? You do not. They have learned so much. I've learned so much. But Hannah, can you just take us out with a question that I think it sort of overlaps with another student's, which is what's the piece of advice that you've gotten that really helped you find your way in production design? How did you find your way into it? Because you didn't wake up, at 12 and go probably production design, that's it. So can you maybe give, or maybe you did, so we want to hear that too, but how can someone, a student, think about like that's the way I want to be in film, is as a production designer?
I know that when I was in film school and I was watching lots of well, even before that, when I grew up and I was watching television and film, and I would get entranced by it. And I think what I didn't know was I was responding emotionally to the world that I was seeing. So then when I was in film school, I noticed it even more because all my projects were really like art direction heavy, but I didn't have the language for it. I didn't know that I was doing that. It's just how I saw the emotion within the film. It's how I watched the movie because I was watching the environment. And the environment then helped me make sense of the story. So that's how I responded. How do you respond to a film? Are you looking at the cinematography and that's what pulls you in? That's what makes you feel the moment between the characters? Are you looking at the location? Are you looking at the design? And there's always this idea for me that when you start out, you observe. You observe film, you observe people, you observe when you start working everything around you. And then you do those things. You mimic those things until you can figure out your own self and
Your
what
own
your
aesthetic.
artistic. And
Mhm.
then you step into the role,
Mhm.
right? But you need to know what you're responding to when you're looking at something like what makes you laugh and what's making you happy. Is it the acting? Because that might be direction, right? Nobody's looking at a film wondering about the budget, and that's a producer. So I don't know how to help you with that one,
Yeah.
but you know, and so those are sort of the things. But honestly, the one piece of advice that I will say that I got that changed everything for me was from Win Thompson, who is Spike Lee's production designer
My
for
friend.
40,
Hmm.
who is also my mentor and the mentor of so many Black creatives in the film industry. I think everybody has been held up by Win at one point or another. But when I was low, when I was down, and I thought that I was going to end my career very many years ago because I didn't feel like I didn't know where to go or what I was doing or how to do this. And Win said to me, he said, don't do films you don't care about. Don't work on something that doesn't speak to you because you won't ever do right by it. And I didn't understand that at the time. But the very next thing that happened to me is Fruitvale Station came across my plate.
Wow.
And everything changed after that.
Hannah Beachler, I am so thrilled that you ended with saying that. First, I was already thinking about Wynn Thomas, who is a legendary, pioneering Black production designer, important American production
Right.
designer who came up, he and Spike together, finding their aesthetic voices, did probably the first 10 films of Spike Lee, everything you see in that Do the Right Thing and Sal's by all of that, and Cinderella Man, films like that, and Hidden Figures.
Mars
That
Attack.
is when
Yep.
Thomas, it's very
Yeah.
important that we give that living legend who's still working that shout out. And I'm so happy that you did. And I'm also happy that you just sort of took the time to note that advice about right now as you're watching films, as you're taking in art in all kinds of ways, to pay attention to what you're feeling, what is attracting you, and why, because that is part of the journey to developing your own voice, just like writers. There's a writerly voice. We all are on this journey to sort of develop what is our unique aesthetic or the stuff that's important to us. And I think that really leans into the advice you got from William Thomas is that
Yep.
you do things that are meaningful. And then the career to me, the other stuff, it
Honestly,
finds you.
that's right.
Thank you, the Hannah Beachler.
Thank you.
Everybody, I order you. I don't even think I have to order you. You know you need to go see Sinners. You know what to do. And now your head is going to be full of delicious stuff to take into it. And we love that so much.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
It's Hannah Beachler, y'all. It's Hannah Beachler.
Thank you. Bye, y'all.
Sinners.